In early 1940, as German forces launched their offensive across the Western Front, they executed Operation Case Yellow, Fall Gelb, which was aimed at defeating France and its allies. The Germans deployed an overwhelming military force, 2.8 million men, 7,500 guns, 4,000 planes, and 2,700 tanks and self-propelled guns. However, only 16 of the 157 German divisions were motorized. In contrast, the Allies, including the Dutch and Belgians, had 3.7 million men, 14,000 guns, 3,000 planes, and 3,700 tanks. The initial focus of German strategy was on the Low Countries, hoping to outflank France's defenses by creating a distraction while executing their main thrust through the Ardennes. The Germans hoped for a daring maneuver called Sichelschnitt, where they would cut off the French and British forces by invading through the relatively weakly defended Ardennes forest. The Allies, however, based their strategy on Plan D, which called for a Franco-British counteroffensive through Belgium. Unfortunately, the Allies were ill-prepared for the speed of the German advance and failed to adequately reinforce critical defensive areas like the Ardennes. On May 10, 1940, the Germans began their invasion of the Low Countries, employing a mix of surprise and deception. They initially pretended that their main thrust would be in the Netherlands, using troops disguised in Dutch uniforms to seize bridges. Despite the Dutch forces putting up some resistance, they quickly capitulated after the Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam, killing 800 civilians and terrorizing the Dutch government into fleeing. Belgium followed suit, retreating quickly after some initial resistance. But German forces continued to press forward with ferocity. The German advance, particularly in the Ardennes, was slowed by some initial obstacles, such as blown bridges and roadblocks, causing massive traffic jams. However, French forces were caught off guard, and despite requests for reinforcements, they were unable to react swiftly. The German panzers, including the divisions led by General Rommel and General Guderian, broke through the French defenses at key locations, like Sedan and Dinant, and began to advance rapidly. Meanwhile, Allied forces in Belgium struggled to organize a defense, and the French and British troops were left scrambling to respond to the German blitzkrieg. By mid-May, the Germans had crossed the Meuse River and established bridgeheads. The French, who had believed the Ardennes to be impassable for large armored formations, now found themselves faced with a rapidly advancing enemy. German tanks, although often made up of weaker models like the Panzerverband and 38T, were overwhelming due to their sheer numbers, speed, and coordination with Luftwaffe air support. On May 15th, the French were forced to abandon their positions, and German forces surged forward, creating a significant gap between the Allied army. Despite the desperate situation, the Allies tried to continue the fight. France's high command, under pressure from both the German breakthrough and political instability, ordered retreats, but the lack of coordination and strategic vision left them exposed. On May 17th, after breaking through at Sedan, the Germans had reached the English Channel, splitting the Allied forces in half and rendering their defense futile. With the collapse of the French defensive line, the Germans continued their push, reaching the coast by May 20th. Allied morale plummeted as the French army, once seen as a formidable force, failed to mount an effective resistance. The political leadership in France was in turmoil, as key figures like Philippe Pétain began to suggest that the war was lost, urging for an armistice. On June 14, the Germans entered Paris, and the French government, in disarray, was left with no choice but to negotiate a surrender. The political atmosphere in France was tense, with some leaders like de Gaulle calling for continued resistance from Britain. Meanwhile, Italy entered the war on June 10th, hoping to capitalize on the situation, but the French still held out in the Alps. The situation was dire, and by June 25, 1940, the armistice between France and Germany was signed, marking the end of the Battle of France in just 46 days. The Battle of France was one of the most devastating defeats in military history, with the lives of nearly 60,000 soldiers lost on both sides and approximately 30,000 civilians killed. France in particular suffered grievously, with millions of its citizens fleeing their homes and over 2 million soldiers becoming prisoners of war. The material destruction was immense, with the Germans losing 1,800 planes and 839 tanks, while the Allies lost 3,020 planes and 3,300 tanks. The rapid German victory shocked the world, particularly the Allies, who had underestimated the speed and effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg strategy. While German propaganda celebrated the role of tanks and aircraft in the victory, in reality it was the infantry that bore most of the brunt of the fighting. Nonetheless, the success allowed Hitler to cement his position, and his overconfidence grew as the war continued. The victory in France marked the high point of Nazi Germany's military power, and the country soon turned its attention to the next phase of the war, the Battle of Britain. However, as history would unfold, this victory would prove to be only temporary. Within 5 years, the tide of war had dramatically shifted, and Germany would find itself on the defensive, facing the combined might of the Allied and Soviet forces. If you found this deep dive into the Battle of France insightful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring more engaging historical content to you. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new video. If you have thoughts or questions about this pivotal moment in history, leave them in the comments below. We love hearing from you.